The gunshot shattered the saloon window at 9:30 on a blistering August morning in 1883. And Evelyn Bradford knew, without looking, that it was her brother making his reputation bigger and her world smaller. She stood at the general store counter in Snowflake, Arizona, clutching a bag of flour against her chest while the proprietor dove behind the register and every other patron scattered like tumbleweeds in a dust storm. Through the begrimed window, she watched Jesse Bradford stride down the middle of Main Street, twin revolvers still smoking, his laughter carrying over the terrified silence that followed his performance. "Your brother is going to get himself killed one of these days," Martha Henderson whispered from where she crouched behind a barrel of pickles. The older woman's face had gone pale beneath her bonnet, and her hands trembled as she clutched her shopping basket. Evelyn said nothing because there was nothing left to say that she had not said 1,000 times before. She was 22 years old and had spent the last 7 years watching Jesse transform from a reckless boy into something far more dangerous. Their parents had died of cholera when she was 15, and Jesse was 17, leaving him the man of the house at an age when he should have been learning responsibility, but instead learned how fast he could draw a pistol. The farm they had inherited 40 miles south of Snowflake had fallen into disrepair while Jesse chased fame and fear across the Arizona territory, and Evelyn had been left to manage what little remained, always in his shadow, always cleaning up his messes, always apologizing to people who looked at her with pity or suspicion simply because she shared his blood. She set the flour on the counter with more force than necessary, paid Mr. Henderson, who had emerged cautiously from his hiding spot, and walked out into the brutal sunshine. The heat hit her like a physical wall, the kind of August heat that made the desert shimmer and dance, that baked the red earth until it cracked. Jesse had disappeared, probably into the Lucky Lady Saloon or perhaps to the jailhouse where Sheriff Watkins would lecture him uselessly, before letting him go because everyone knew Jesse Bradford was too quick and too mean to push too far. Evelyn loaded her supplies into the wagon, her movements mechanical from years of practice. The 2 horses, Buttercup and Sam, nickered softly in greeting, and she stroked their noses, finding more comfort in their simple presence than she had found in human company for longer than she cared to admit. She was climbing onto the wagon seat when she noticed him. He stood beside the livery stable across the street, a tall man in simple brown trousers and a faded blue work shirt, his hat pulled low against the sun. Unlike everyone else who had witnessed Jesse's display, he had not scattered or hidden. He had simply stepped aside, pressed against the stable wall, and waited for the danger to pass with the patient stillness of someone who understood violence, but chose not to participate in it. He was watching her now, and when their eyes met, he tipped his hat in a gesture so courteous and unexpected that she felt something flutter in her chest. She looked away quickly, shook the reins, and guided the wagon down Main Street toward the road that would take her home. But the image of that quiet man stayed with her, tucked into a corner of her mind like a pressed flower in a book she had not opened in years. The Bradford farm sat in a shallow valley where an underground spring kept a few acres green enough for vegetables and a small herd of cattle. The house was adobe, thick-walled against the heat, with a covered porch that faced east toward the distant mountains. Evelyn had tried to maintain it as best she could, but without Jesse's help, everything took twice as long and yielded half the results. The vegetable garden struggled in the relentless sun. The fences needed mending. The barn roof leaked during the rare summer storms that rolled through with thunder and little rain. She spent the afternoon working in the garden, coaxing water from the irrigation ditches she had dug herself, pulling weeds and checking the squash and beans and tomatoes that represented her survival. Jesse contributed nothing. He would disappear for days or weeks at a time, return with money from poker games or rewards for tracking down outlaws, throw a handful of bills on the kitchen table, and then vanish again. The money never lasted, and Evelyn had learned to hide what she could, squirreling away dollars in tin cans buried beneath the floorboards, because she knew that someday Jesse's luck would run out, and she would need every penny to rebuild whatever life remained. He came home 3 days later just after sunset, riding hard with 2 other men she recognized from his gang. They were loud and drunk, whooping and firing shots into the air as they thundered up to the house. Evelyn stood on the porch, her arms crossed, her jaw set. "Evie!" Jesse shouted, his handsome face flushed with whiskey and whatever trouble he had found. He swung down from his horse with theatrical flair, his spurs jingling. "Your big brother just won $300 in a poker game in Hallbrook. We are going to have a celebration." "You fired shots through the saloon window in Snowflake," she said flatly. "Mrs. Henderson nearly had apoplexy. One of these days you are going to hurt someone who does not deserve it." Jesse waved dismissively. "Nobody got hurt. I was just having some fun." "You need to stop being so serious all the time." He mounted the porch steps and tried to hug her, but she stepped back, the familiar disappointment settling over her like a heavy blanket. "I do not want your friends here," she said quietly. "This is our parents' house." "It is my house," Jesse corrected, his voice hardening. "Pa left it to me. You just live here." The words were a knife between her ribs, all the more painful because they were legally true. Their father's will had left the property to Jesse as the eldest son. Following tradition, Evelyn had not thought to question until it was too late. She was dependent on her brother's goodwill, and his goodwill was an unpredictable thing that came and went like the wind. She turned and walked into the house, locking herself in her small bedroom while Jesse and his friends caroused on the porch, their laughter and cursing carrying through the thin walls. She lay on her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster, and wondered how much longer she could endure this half-life of fear and shame and endless waiting. The next morning, Jesse and his friends were gone, along with the $30 she had hidden in a flour tin in the kitchen. She discovered the theft when she went to make breakfast and found the tin overturned, empty on the counter. She stood there for a long moment, her hands gripping the edge of the table, breathing slowly through her nose until the urge to scream passed. She saddled Buttercup and rode to Snowflake. She told herself she was going for supplies, but truthfully she just needed to escape the suffocating silence of the farmhouse, the constant reminder of everything she had lost. The town was quiet under the mid-morning sun, and she hitched Buttercup outside the general store before walking aimlessly down the wooden sidewalk. "Miss Bradford." She turned. The quiet man from 3 days ago stood a few feet away, his hat in his hands. Up close, she could see he was probably in his mid-20s, with brown hair that needed cutting and gray eyes that held a steadiness she had rarely encountered. His face was weathered from sun and wind, with the kind of honest where that came from genuine work rather than barroom brawls. "Yes," she said warily, because in her experience, men who approached her usually wanted something, usually wanted to know about Jesse, usually wanted to attach themselves to his dangerous fame. "I am Zachary Morrison," he said. His voice was low and calm, with a slight drawl that suggested he had come from somewhere farther south. "I have been working at the Morrison Ranch north of here. No relation, just coincidence on the name. I saw you the other day and wanted to introduce myself properly." "Why?" The question came out sharper than she intended, defensive after years of guarding herself. He blinked, surprised by her directness, but did not retreat. "Because you looked like you could use a friend," he said simply. "And because I have seen what it is like to live in someone else's shadow. My older brother was a soldier who died at Gettysburg. Everyone in my family spent years talking about his heroism while I was just the younger son who stayed home to work the farm. It is not the same as your situation, but I recognize the look." Evelyn felt something crack inside her, some carefully constructed wall she had built to keep the world at a distance. "You do not know anything about my situation," she whispered, but the words lacked conviction. "I know your brother is Jesse Bradford," Zachary said. "I know he is building a reputation as one of the fastest guns in the territory. And I know you come into town alone, buy your own supplies, and look like you are carrying the weight of the sky on your shoulders." He paused, then added gently, "I know you deserve better than that." She wanted to argue, wanted to defend Jesse out of some misplaced sense of family loyalty, but the truth was she agreed with every word Zachary Morrison had just spoken. She was tired. Bone-deep, soul-crushing tired of being afraid, of cleaning up messes, of apologizing for existing in Jesse's orbit. "I do not need anyone's pity," she managed. "I am not offering pity," Zachary said. "I am offering coffee if you have a few minutes. The hotel dining room makes decent coffee, and I would like to hear about something other than cattle and drought for a change. But if you would rather not, I understand. I will leave you alone." He started to turn away, and Evelyn found herself speaking before she could overthink it. "Wait." He turned back, hope flickering across his features. "I could use some coffee," she admitted. They sat in the hotel dining room with cups of strong black coffee between them, and Zachary Morrison told her about growing up in Texas, about coming to Arizona 5 years ago to work cattle, about his dream of someday having a small ranch of his own where he could raise horses. He spoke quietly, without boastfulness, and he asked her questions about the farm, about what crops grew best in the valley, about the book she had mentioned seeing in the general store window. "I like to read," she confessed. "When I have time, which is not often. My mother taught me, and I used to think maybe I would be a teacher someday, but then everything changed." "It is not too late," Zachary said. "You are young. You could still teach." "I am stuck," Evelyn said, the words tumbling out now that the dam had broken. "The farm is in Jesse's name. Everything is in his name. I have nowhere to go and no way to get there. I am trapped watching him destroy himself and taking me down with him." Zachary was quiet for a moment, his fingers wrapped around his coffee cup. Then he said, "What if you did not have to be trapped? What if there was another way?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that you have choices, even if they do not feel like it right now. You could find work in town. You could save money. You could build something that belongs to you, not to your brother." He leaned forward, his gray eyes intent. "I am not saying it would be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is." Evelyn stared at him, feeling something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of courage. "I do not even know you," she said. "Then get to know me," Zachary replied. "I am not going anywhere." Over the following weeks, Evelyn found excuses to ride into Snowflake. She needed supplies. She needed to check on a dress being mended. She needed to pick up a package from the post office. Each time, Zachary Morrison seemed to materialize, always respectful, always kind, always ready with a smile or a story or simply a quiet presence that soothed the constant anxiety she carried. They took walks along the creek that ran behind the town, sat on benches in the small park where cottonwood trees provided blessed shade, and talked about everything and nothing. He told her about working on the Morrison ranch, about the owner's 12-year-old son who was learning to break horses, and kept asking Zachary to teach him trick riding. She told him about her mother's flower garden that she had tried to recreate at the farm, about the hummingbirds that visited her struggling roses, about the books she had loved as a child. "You never talk about your brother anymore," Zachary observed one afternoon in late September as they sat by the creek. The weather had cooled slightly, the brutal summer heat giving way to something more bearable. "What is there to say?" Evelyn replied. "He is who he is. Talking about it will not change anything." "You want it to change." She looked at him, at this quiet man who had somehow become the brightest part of her days, and said, "Yes, I want everything to change." Zachary reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was calloused from rope and reins, warm and solid. "Then let us change it," he said, "together. I do not understand what you are suggesting. I am suggesting that you do not have to live under your brother's shadow anymore. I am suggesting that maybe you and I could build something together, something that belongs to just us." He took a breath, his thumb moving gently over her knuckles. "I am suggesting that I have fallen in love with you, Evelyn Bradford, and I think maybe you might feel the same way about me." Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "Zachary, I know it is fast," he continued. "I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I also know that some things you just recognize, some people you just understand from the first moment, and I understood you." He paused. "Tell me if I am wrong. Tell me to leave you alone, and I will. But if I am right, if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then say so. Please." Evelyn thought about Jesse, about the farm, about the life she had been living like a sentence she had not earned. Then she thought about Zachary, about the way he listened, the way he treated her like she mattered, the way he made her believe that maybe there was more to her story than just being Jesse Bradford's long-suffering sister. "You are not wrong," she whispered. Zachary's face transformed, joy breaking across it like sunrise. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet, and before she could think or hesitate or let fear stop her, he kissed her. It was soft and careful and full of promise, and Evelyn kissed him back, tasting hope and possibility and a future she had thought was lost forever. When they broke apart, she was shaking. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Now we make a plan," Zachary said. "Now we figure out how to give you the life you deserve." The plan took shape over the next several weeks. Zachary had been saving his wages for 5 years, living frugally in the ranch bunkhouse and dreaming of his own place. He had nearly $800 hidden in a bank account in Holbrook, enough to put down payment on land. He had also heard about a small property for sale about 15 miles northeast of Snowflake, closer to the mountains where springs were more reliable and the grazing was better. It was only 80 acres with a modest house and barn, but it was available and it was affordable. "I had planned to buy it on my own eventually," Zachary told Evelyn as they rode out to look at the property one October afternoon. "But everything changed when I met you. Now I cannot imagine building anything without you beside me." The property was beautiful in a stark, high desert way. The house was small but solid, built of stone and timber by a Swedish immigrant who had returned east after his wife died. The barn needed work but was structurally sound. A clear stream ran through the northeast corner, fed by mountain snowmelt, and there were stands of ponderosa pine on the higher elevations. Evelyn stood on the porch of the little stone house and looked out over land that could be hers, really hers, and felt tears streaming down her face. "What is wrong?" Zachary asked, alarmed. "Nothing is wrong," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Everything is right. Everything is finally right." He wrapped his arms around her, and they stood there watching the afternoon light paint the mountains gold and purple. "Marry me," he said into her hair. "Marry me and let us build this life together. Yes, Evelyn said without hesitation. Yes. They married in early November in the small church in Snowflake, with just a handful of witnesses, including the preacher's wife and the owner of the Morrison ranch where Zachary worked. Evelyn wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk at the farm, and carried wildflowers that Zachary had picked that morning. She did not invite Jesse because Jesse had not been home in 6 weeks, and she had no idea where he was, and she discovered that she did not care. For the first time in 7 years, she was doing something for herself, choosing her own path, stepping out of the shadow into sunlight. The ceremony was simple and brief. Zachary's voice shook slightly when he said his vows, and Evelyn's hands trembled when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife. They kissed in front of the altar, and Evelyn felt a completeness she had never experienced before, as though some missing piece of herself had finally clicked into place. They spent their wedding night at the hotel in Snowflake, a luxury they could barely afford, but that Zachary insisted upon. He was gentle and patient, and Evelyn discovered that physical love could be tender, could be something given and received with joy rather than demanded or taken. They lay together afterward in the narrow hotel bed, Zachary's arm around her shoulders, and talked until dawn about the life they would build. "I want to raise horses," Zachary said. "Good working horses that are trained well and treated right, and maybe some cattle for income. Nothing huge, just enough to be comfortable." "I want a garden," Evelyn said. "A real garden with vegetables and flowers and maybe some fruit trees if they will grow there. And I want to keep bees. My mother kept bees when I was little." "Then you will have bees," Zachary promised. "You will have everything you want, Evelyn Morrison. I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure of it." They moved into the stone house a week later after Zachary made the final payment and signed the deed. The day they moved, Evelyn rode out to the Bradford farm one last time to collect her belongings. Jesse was there, sprawled on the porch with a bottle of whiskey, his face unshaven and his eyes bloodshot. "Where have you been?" he demanded when he saw her. "I've been home for 3 days and there is no food in the house. You have chores to do." "I do not live here anymore," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the fear that tried to creep up her spine. "I got married. I am moving to my own place." Jessie stared at her like she had spoken a foreign language. "You what?" "I married Zachary Morrison. We bought property northeast of here. I came to get my things." Jesse stood up, swaying slightly, his face darkening. "You cannot just leave. You belong here. This is your home." "This was never my home," Evelyn said. "It was a prison, and I am done." She walked past him into the house, her heart hammering but her steps firm. She packed her clothes, her mother's quilts, the few books she owned, and the photograph of her parents that sat on the mantel. Jesse followed her, alternately yelling and pleading, but she ignored him. When she carried the last bundle out to the wagon where Zachary waited, rifle resting across his lap in case Jesse got aggressive, Jesse grabbed her arm. "You cannot do this to me," he said, and for the first time she heard real fear beneath the anger. "Evie, you are all I have left." She looked at him, at her older brother who had chosen reputation over family, violence over responsibility, and felt a complicated mix of love and pity and exhaustion. "You did this to yourself," she said quietly. "You had a choice every single day and you chose the gun over everything else. I cannot save you from that. I cannot even save myself from it unless I leave." "That man has poisoned you against me," Jesse spat, glaring at Zachary. "That man showed me what my life could be," Evelyn corrected. "That man gave me hope. You only ever gave me fear." She pulled her arm free and climbed onto the wagon beside Zachary. As they drove away, she did not look back. Jesse stood on the porch, watching them go, and she knew it was the last time she would see him for a long while. The knowledge hurt, but it also freed her. The first months at the new property were hard work, but deeply satisfying. Zachary continued working at the Morrison Ranch during the day to bring in steady money while they established the place. Evelyn threw herself into creating a home. She scrubbed the stone house until it gleamed, sewed curtains from fabric she bought in town, and planted the beginning of her garden. The work was physical and exhausting, but every aching muscle and every calloused palm felt like victory because she was building something that belonged to her. Zachary came home each evening tired and dusty, and they would eat dinner together at the small table he had built, talking about their days. He told her about the horses he was training, about the ranch owner's son who had finally mastered staying in the saddle during a full gallop. She told him about the vegetable seedlings she had started, about the wild turkey she had seen near the creek, about her plans for expanding the chicken coop they were building. On Sundays, they worked together on projects too big for one person. They repaired the barn roof, replaced rotted fence posts, cleared brush from around the house to reduce fire danger. They worked in comfortable silence or easy conversation, and Evelyn discovered the profound pleasure of partnership, of having someone who shouldered the burden with her instead of adding to it. Winter came to the high desert, cold and surprisingly snowy. The mountains turned white, and frost glittered on the ground each morning. Evelyn and Zachary spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other from books they borrowed from the small library in Snowflake, or simply sitting close and watching the flames dance. On Christmas Eve, Zachary gave her a pair of young beehives he had commissioned from a carpenter in town, and Evelyn cried with happiness. She gave him a new saddle blanket she had woven herself, painstakingly learning the craft from a woman in town. "I have never been this happy," she told him as they lay in bed that night, snow falling softly outside their window. "I did not know life could be like this." Zachary kissed her forehead. "It is only going to get better," he promised. In spring, they bought their first horses, a pair of young mares with good bloodlines that Zachary planned to breed. They also acquired 6 head of cattle and expanded the chicken flock. The garden exploded into life with the warming weather, and Evelyn spent hours tending it, coaxing beans and squash and tomatoes from the rich soil near the stream. The bees proved industrious, and by late summer they had their first honey harvest, golden and sweet, that Evelyn sold in town for a surprising profit. They fell into a rhythm, a life that revolved around seasons and weather and the needs of animals and land. It was simple but not easy, demanding but not exhausting, challenging but not crushing. Evelyn blossomed like one of her flowers, losing the haunted look she had worn for so long, gaining weight and color, and a lightness that Zachary said made her even more beautiful than the day he had first seen her. "You were beautiful then too," he clarified one evening in their second summer together. "But you looked like you were carved from stone, like you were holding yourself together through pure will. Now you look alive." "I am alive," Evelyn said, reaching across the dinner table to take his hand. "For the first time in years, I actually feel alive." They heard news of Jesse occasionally through travelers or when they went to town. He had been in a shooting in Prescott. He had won a fortune in Tucson and lost it in Phoenix. He had joined up with a gang running cattle across the border. The stories painted a picture of a man spiraling further into the violence he had chosen, and Evelyn felt sad but no longer responsible. She had offered Jesse a lifeline once, had begged him to change, and he had refused. His choices were his own, and she could not carry them anymore. In the fall of their second year, Evelyn realized she was pregnant. She told Zachary one evening after supper, nervous despite knowing he would be thrilled. They had talked about children abstractly, someday in the future, but now someday was immediate and real. Zachary's face went through about 6 different emotions in rapid succession before landing on pure joy. He swept her into his arms, careful despite his excitement, and spun her around. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Evelyn asked, laughing at his exuberance. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Zachary said. He set her down gently, then knelt and pressed his ear to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he said solemnly. "This is your father. Your mother and I are very excited to meet you." Evelyn ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love for this good, gentle man who had given her everything she had thought was lost. The pregnancy was healthy but not easy. Morning sickness plagued her through the first 3 months, and the last 6 weeks were uncomfortable as she carried the weight in the summer heat. Zachary hovered and worried, taking on all the heavy work and insisting she rest more than she wanted. Women from town and from nearby ranches visited, bringing advice and baby clothes and casseroles, welcoming Evelyn into the community of mothers with a warmth that made her teary-eyed. Their son was born on a hot July evening in 1886, delivered by a midwife from Snowflake, with Zachary pacing anxiously in the next room. The labor was long and painful, but when the midwife finally laid the squalling infant in Evelyn's arms, every moment of discomfort was forgotten. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and his father's gray eyes and tiny fists that waved indignantly at being thrust into the bright, overwhelming world. Zachary came in, pale and shaking, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his son with an expression of awe. "He is so small," he whispered. "He is perfect," Evelyn said. They named him Samuel Thomas Morrison after Zachary's father and Evelyn's father, respectively. Sam proved to be a demanding baby, colicky and fussy for the first few months. But Zachary and Evelyn took turns walking him and soothing him with inexhaustible patience. Evelyn discovered that, despite her exhaustion, despite the way motherhood turned her life upside down, she had never felt more complete. She had a husband who loved her, a son who depended on her, and a home that was truly hers. The shadow she had lived under for so long had been replaced with sunlight. Sam grew into a happy toddler, energetic and curious, trailing after his father around the ranch and helping his mother in the garden with more enthusiasm than effectiveness. Zachary proved to be a wonderful father, patient and playful, teaching Sam about horses and cattle and the land with the same gentle thoroughness he brought to everything. When Sam was 2, Evelyn became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter arrived on a crisp November morning, small and dark-haired like her brother but with Evelyn's brown eyes and serious expression. They named her Margaret Rose, Maggie for short, after Evelyn's mother. Life settled into a beautiful chaos of children and animals and the endless cycle of seasons. The ranch prospered. Zachary's horses gained a reputation for being well-trained and reliable, and buyers came from as far as Flagstaff to purchase them. Evelyn's honey became a staple at the general store in Snowflake, and her preserves were requested for church socials and harvest festivals. They added on to the stone house, building 2 more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. They saved money, paid down their debts, and built something solid and lasting. Jesse appeared one afternoon in the spring of 1889, riding up to the house unannounced on a lathered horse. Evelyn was in the garden with 4-year-old Maggie when she saw him coming, and her heart jumped into her throat. She had not seen her brother in 6 years, and the man who dismounted looked far older than 31. He was gaunt, with a scar across his left cheek and eyes that held a haunted quality she had never seen before. "Evie," he said, his voice rough. She stood slowly, positioning herself between Jesse and Maggie instinctively. "Jesse." They stared at each other across the garden rows. Maggie peeked around her mother's skirts, thumb in her mouth, watching the stranger with wide eyes. "I need help," Jesse said finally. "I am in trouble." "You have been in trouble for years," Evelyn replied. "Why come to me now? Because you are the only family I have left." He took off his hat, turning it in his hands, a gesture she remembered from childhood when he was trying to apologize for something. "I did some things, Evie, bad things, worse than usual. There are men after me, serious men. I cannot outrun them forever." "Then stop running," Evelyn said. "Turn yourself in. Face what you have done." Jesse laughed bitterly. "It does not work like that. You think I will get a fair trial? I am Jesse Bradford. They will hang me just for my name." "Maybe you should have thought about that before you built that name," Evelyn said, and was surprised by how little anger she felt. Just weariness and a distant sadness for the boy her brother had been before he chose violence. Zachary emerged from the barn, saw Jesse, and crossed the yard with quick strides. Sam followed, 5 years old and full of questions. "Papa, who is that?" "Go in the house, Sam," Zachary said quietly. "Take your sister." "But Papa, now, son." Something in Zachary's tone brooked no argument. Sam took Maggie's hand and led her toward the house, looking back over his shoulder with curiosity. Zachary stopped beside Evelyn, his presence solid and reassuring. "Bradford," he said with a nod. "Morrison," Jesse replied. He looked at Evelyn's husband with poorly concealed resentment. "Taking care of my sister. She is my wife," Zachary said evenly. "And yes, I take care of my family." The implication hung in the air. Jesse flushed but said nothing. "You need to leave," Evelyn said. "I am sorry, Jesse. I am sorry for how your life turned out, and I am sorry you are in trouble. But I cannot help you. I have children now. I have a good life. I will not risk it, not even for you." "I am your brother," Jesse said, and now there was desperation in his voice. "I am your blood." "Blood does not mean as much as you think it does," Evelyn replied. "You taught me that. You chose your path and I chose mine. We do not walk together anymore." Jesse stood there for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he put his hat back on and mounted his horse. "I guess that is it then," he said. "I guess it is," Evelyn agreed. "I hope you find whatever you are looking for, Jesse." "I really do, but you will not find it here." Jesse looked like he wanted to say something else, but instead he just wheeled his horse and rode away, disappearing down the trail at a gallop. Evelyn watched him go, and this time when she turned away, she felt only relief. That chapter of her life was closed. Zachary put his arm around her shoulders. "Are you all right?" "I am," Evelyn said, and meant it. "I am exactly where I am supposed to be." They heard later that summer that Jesse Bradford had been killed in a shootout with lawmen near the Mexican border. The news came through a traveler passing through Snowflake, and when someone mentioned it to Evelyn in the general store, she accepted it quietly. That night, she sat on the porch with Zachary after the children were asleep and allowed herself to cry. Not for the man Jesse had become, but for the brother she had lost years before his death, for the childhood they had shared before everything went wrong, for the waste of a life that could have been different. "He was not always bad," she told Zachary through her tears. "When we were young, he was my hero. He taught me to ride. He made me laugh. He was supposed to take care of me, and somewhere along the way everything got twisted." "I know," Zachary said, holding her. "I am sorry you lost him." "I lost him a long time ago," Evelyn said. "This is just making it official." She grieved in her own way, privately and briefly, and then she let it go. The farm demanded attention, the children needed care, and life moved relentlessly forward. She planted a rose bush near the house in memory of the brother she had once known, and sometimes when she tended it, She said a quiet prayer for his troubled soul. But mostly, she focused on the life she had built, the family she had created, the future that stretched bright and promising ahead. The years flowed like the stream that ran through their property, steady and life-giving. Sam grew tall and serious, showing his father's patience with animals and his mother's love of growing things. He was quiet but not shy, thoughtful in a way that made adults smile and predict he would do well in life. Maggie was all fire and determination, climbing trees and pestering to be allowed to help with the horses long before she was old enough. She had her mother's stubbornness and her father's courage, a combination that both delighted and occasionally exasperated her parents. In 1892, Evelyn gave birth to twin boys, Isaac and Elijah, who turned the household into a cheerful chaos. The twins were identical in appearance but opposite in temperament. Isaac was adventurous and impulsive while Elijah was cautious and thoughtful. Together, they were a force of nature that kept everyone on their toes. The stone house grew again to accommodate the expanding family. They added a second story with more bedrooms and expanded the porch that wrapped around 3 sides of the house. The ranch prospered beyond anything Zachary had dreamed when he first bought the property. His horses were renowned across northern Arizona, and buyers came from as far as New Mexico and Utah. Evelyn's honey and preserves had become a small business in their own right, sold not just in Snowflake but in Holbrook and Winslow as well. They hired help during busy seasons, local men who appreciated Zachary's fairness and Evelyn's kindness. The Morrison place became known as a good outfit to work for, and they never lacked for hands when they needed them. Evelyn made sure everyone who worked for them got fed well and treated respectfully, remembering too clearly what it felt like to be powerless and dependent on someone else's goodwill. As the children grew, Evelyn started teaching them herself, using the books she accumulated and the knowledge she had gained. Sam loved reading and mathematics, while Maggie excelled at anything involving animals. The twins were still young but showed early signs of sharp intelligence and endless energy. On their 10th wedding anniversary in November 1895, Zachary surprised Evelyn with a trip to Flagstaff, their first real vacation since they had married. They left the children with a neighbor family and spent 3 days in the mountain town, staying in a real hotel with electric lights and dining in restaurants, and walking through shops full of goods shipped by train from back east. On their last evening, they sat in the hotel dining room over a dinner that neither of them had to cook, and Zachary took her hand across the table. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked. Evelyn thought about the question seriously, looking back over the decades since she had stood in Snowflake watching Jesse shoot out the saloon window, since she had first met the quiet man who had offered her coffee and kindness. She thought about the hard years on the Bradford farm, the shadow she had lived under, the fear that had been her constant companion. Then she thought about the life she had now, the husband who loved her, the children who filled her days with purpose and joy, the home she had built with her own hands. "Not a single one," she said. "Every choice I made led me here, led me to you. I would not change anything." Zachary smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling in the way that still made her heart flutter. "I knew the first moment I saw you that you were going to be important," he said. "I did not know how or why, but I knew I needed to know you, and every day since then has proven me right. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Evelyn Morrison." "You saved me," Evelyn said softly. "I was drowning and you threw me a rope." "No," Zachary corrected gently. "I offered you a rope. You saved yourself. You had the courage to grab it and climb out. I was just lucky enough to be there when you did." They finished their dinner in comfortable silence, hands linked across the table, and walked back to the hotel through the cool mountain evening. Later, lying in the unfamiliar bed in the unfamiliar room, Evelyn felt profoundly grateful for the strange and winding path that had brought her to this moment. The 20th century arrived with celebration and optimism. Evelyn and Zachary hosted a New Year's gathering at the ranch, inviting neighbors and friends from town. The house was full of laughter and music, children running wild and adults talking about the marvels of the new age. There was talk of automobiles that might eventually replace horses, of airplanes that could supposedly fly, of electricity coming to even small towns like Snowflake. "The world is changing," Zachary observed as they stood together on the porch watching their guests depart under a sky brilliant with stars. "Sometimes I wonder if there will be a place for people like us, for ranchers and farmers doing things the old way." "There will always be a place for good, honest work," Evelyn said. "The methods might change, but the land will always need tending. Animals will always need caring for. People will always need food and shelter. What we do matters, Zachary. It will always matter." He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "As long as I have you, I do not care what changes," he said. "You are my constant. Everything else can shift, but we are solid." Sam turned 16 in 1897, a young man now with his father's height and his mother's determination. He had decided he wanted to be a veterinarian, inspired by years of helping his father with sick or injured horses. It would mean going away to school eventually, a prospect that thrilled and terrified Evelyn in equal measure. Her firstborn, the baby she had held in her arms on that hot July evening, was growing up and preparing to make his own way in the world. Maggie was 12, and already showing signs of being a formidable woman. She could ride as well as any hand on the ranch, could rope and brand and break horses with skill that astonished visitors. She had declared she was never getting married because she planned to run her own ranch someday, and neither Evelyn nor Zachary doubted she would do exactly that. The twins were 7, starting to differentiate into their own people rather than the unit they had been as toddlers. Isaac wanted to be a railroad engineer, fascinated by the trains that passed through Hallbrook. Elijah wanted to be a teacher like his mother, drawn to books and learning in a way that made Evelyn's heart swell with pride. In the summer of 1899, Evelyn was shocked to discover she was pregnant again at 38. She had assumed her childbearing years were behind her, but apparently her body had other plans. Zachary was delighted despite her protests that they were too old to be starting over with an infant. "We are not old," he insisted. "We are experienced. This baby is lucky to have us." Their youngest daughter was born in March of 1900, a spring baby with red gold hair and green eyes unlike anyone else in the family. They named her Catherine Jane, Katie for short, and she proved to be a cheerful, easy baby who charmed everyone she met. Sam and Maggie doted on their little sister, and the twins treated her like a living doll, fascinated by every gurgle and gesture. The family gathered for a photograph that summer, a rare treat when an itinerant photographer passed through Snowflake. They dressed in their best clothes and arranged themselves in front of the stone house, Zachary and Evelyn in the center with baby Katie in Evelyn's arms, surrounded by their other children and the dogs that were always underfoot. The resulting picture captured a moment of perfect contentment, faces smiling, eyes bright, the house and barn and mountains visible in the background. Evelyn framed the photograph and hung it in the front room where she could see it every day. Sometimes she would stop in her work and just look at it, marveling at the life she had built. From the frightened, trapped woman standing in Snowflake clutching a bag of flour while her brother shot out saloon windows, to this, Surrounded by love and purpose and accomplishment, she had traveled an enormous distance, and every step of the journey had been worth it. Sam left for veterinary school in California in 1901, a departure that left the house feeling strangely empty despite the 4 children who remained. Evelyn cried when the train pulled away, and Zachary held her hand, both of them proud and sad and hopeful. Their son was making his own way, equipped with the values they had taught him and the skills he had learned on the ranch. Maggie took over more responsibility on the ranch, working alongside her father with the horses and proving she had an almost supernatural talent for training difficult animals. She was 17 and beautiful in a wild, unconventional way that attracted plenty of attention from young men in the area. But she remained focused on her own goals, politely but firmly declining all romantic overtures. "I am not ready," she told her mother when Evelyn gently asked if she was interested in anyone. "Maybe someday, but right now I have too much I want to do. I am not going to give up my dreams for some boy." "Make sure it is the right person," Evelyn advised. "Someone who wants to add to your dreams, not replace them. Like Papa did for you," Maggie asked with a knowing smile. "Exactly like that," Evelyn agreed. The twins were growing like weeds, 11 years old and full of questions and energy. Isaac had his father teaching him to ride like a proper ranch hand, while Elijah spent hours with his mother learning everything she could teach him. Katie was a toddler, into everything and afraid of nothing, keeping everyone perpetually alert. Life on the ranch was busy and demanding, but it was also deeply satisfying. Evelyn and Zachary had created something lasting, something that would continue beyond them. The children were healthy and happy and equipped to make their own ways in the world. The ranch was prosperous and well respected. They had weathered droughts and hard winters, financial difficulties and personal challenges, and emerged stronger each time. One evening in the fall of 1903, after the children were all in bed and the house was finally quiet, Evelyn and Zachary sat on the porch as they had done countless times over the years. The air was cool, autumn crisp, with the smell of pine drifting down from the mountains. The sky was a glory of stars, the Milky Way a river of light overhead. "You remember the first time we sat and talked?" Evelyn asked. "In the hotel dining room in Snowflake." "I remember everything about that day," Zachary said. "You were so wary, like a wild horse that had been mistreated and was not sure whether to trust anyone ever again. I just wanted to prove to you that not everyone was dangerous." "You did more than that," Evelyn said. "You showed me what my life could be. You showed me I deserved better than what I had accepted. You gave me hope when I had forgotten what hope felt like." "You gave me purpose," Zachary replied. "I was just drifting before I met you, working hard but not building toward anything particular. You gave me something to work for, something to protect, something to love. Everything good in my life traces back to the day I worked up the courage to introduce myself to you." Evelyn leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she said. "I loved you then, and I love you now, and I will love you until the day I die. And beyond that, if there is anything after," Zachary said, kissing her temple. "We built something good, Evelyn, something that is going to last." The years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of a full and busy life. Sam graduated from veterinary school and returned to Arizona, opening a practice in Flagstaff, but visiting the ranch often. Maggie, at 21, met a young rancher named Henry Cole from over near Show Low, a quiet man who reminded Evelyn powerfully of Zachary. Henry was patient enough to court Maggie properly, respectful of her ambitions, and supportive when she told him She wanted to continue working with horses after they married. They wed in 1905 in a ceremony at the Morrison Ranch, and Evelyn saw her daughter start a new chapter with the same mixture of joy and wistfulness she had felt when Sam left for school. The twins finished their schooling, Isaac pursuing his railroad dreams and eventually landing a position with the Santa Fe line, while Elijah took a teaching job in Snowflake. Katie was growing into a charming young girl with a talent for music and a sunny disposition that brought light to every room she entered. Zachary turned 50 in 1908, and Evelyn was 47. They were grandparents now, with Sam married to a doctor's daughter from Flagstaff and expecting their first child, and Maggie and Henry parents to a baby boy. The stone house that had once seemed so spacious felt delightfully crowded during family gatherings, full of children and grandchildren and the noise of a life well lived. One afternoon in the spring of 1910, Evelyn was working in her garden, now an extensive operation that supplied not just the family but several restaurants in surrounding towns, when she heard a horse approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw a young man dismounting at the gate. He was perhaps 19 or 20, dusty from travel, with a familiar set to his shoulders that made her heart skip. As he came closer, she saw the resemblance clearly. He had Jessia's dark hair and her own brown eyes, and when he removed his hat, the gesture was one she remembered from long ago. "Madam," he said politely, "I am looking for Evelyn Bradford. I was told she might live here." "I am Evelyn Morrison," she corrected gently. "Bradford was my maiden name." "How can I help you?" The young man swallowed hard. "My name is Daniel Bradford. I think you are my father's sister. I think you are my aunt." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Evelyn set down her gardening tools and gestured to the porch. "Let us sit down," she said, "and you can tell me your story." Daniel Bradford, it turned out, was the son Jesse had never known he had. His mother had been a woman Jesse had been involved with in Prescott back in 1890. She had never told Jesse about the pregnancy, knowing his lifestyle was no place for a child, and had raised Daniel on her own, working as a seamstress. She had recently died of influenza, and in going through her things, Daniel had found letters that revealed his father's identity and the fact that he had an aunt who might still be alive. "I do not want anything," Daniel said hastily. "I am not here for money or anything like that. I just wanted to know if there was any family left, if there was someone who could tell me about my father." Evelyn looked at this young man, Jesse's son, her nephew, and felt a complicated wash of emotions, but predominant among them was compassion. Daniel had done nothing wrong. He was not responsible for his father's choices. "Your father was my older brother," she said slowly. "He was not a good man in the end, Daniel. I will not lie to you about that, but he was not always bad. When we were young, before our parents died, he had the potential to be different. Life just took him down a dark path." She told him about Jesse, the good and the bad, not sparing the truth, but also not dwelling on the worst of it. She told him about their childhood, about the farm, about how everything had changed after their parents died. Daniel listened intently, his young face serious, occasionally asking questions. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Thank you for being honest. A lot of people would have tried to pretty it up or make him sound better than he was." "You deserve the truth," Evelyn said. "Whatever you do with that truth is up to you. But you are not your father, Daniel. You get to choose your own path." Zachary came home from working with the horses and found them still talking. Evelyn introduced Daniel, and Zachary welcomed the young man with his characteristic warmth. They invited him to stay for dinner, and then for the night, and by the time Daniel left 2 days later, Evelyn had told him he was welcome to visit any time, that he had family now if he wanted it. Daniel did visit, returning several times over the following years. He was a good young man, hard-working and honest, who had chosen to make something of himself despite his father's legacy. He eventually settled in Flagstaff, working as a carpenter, and became part of the extended family gatherings. Evelyn was glad to know him, glad that something positive had come from Jesse's troubled life. The years rolled on into the new decade. The world was changing faster now, with automobiles becoming common and talk of a war in Europe that seemed impossibly far away from their corner of Arizona. The Morrison Ranch continued to prosper under Zachary and Evelyn's steady management, with Maggie and Henry taking on more responsibilities, as Zachary's joints started to ache on cold mornings. Sam's veterinary practice was thriving, and he had 3 children who visited the ranch often. Maggie and Henry had 4 children now, a rambunctious crew who ran wild across the property during visits. Isaac was married to a woman he had met in Albuquerque and working his way up in the railroad company. Elijah was the principal of the school in Snowflake, married to one of his fellow teachers. Katie, at 14, was the family's artistic soul, filling the house with music and laughter. In 1915, Evelyn and Zachary celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a large gathering at the ranch. All their children came, bringing grandchildren and spouses, and the extended family that included Daniel and his new wife and several of the hands who had worked for them over the years and become like family. It was a day of joy and reflection, of looking back on 3 decades of partnership and looking forward to whatever time remained. That evening, after the guests had departed, and the house was quiet except for Katie practicing piano in the front room, Evelyn and Zachary walked down to the stream that ran through their property. The water burbled over stones, catching the last light of the sunset, and cottonwood trees rustled overhead. 30 years, Zachary said wonderingly. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I know exactly what you mean, Evelyn said. Sometimes I still feel like that scared young woman who married you and moved here, wondering if I was making the right choice. And then I look at our life, at our children and grandchildren, at this place we built together, and I cannot imagine having made any other choice. Do you ever think about how different things could have been? Zachary asked. If I had not worked up the courage to talk to you that day in Snowflake, if you had said no, I try not to think about it, Evelyn admitted. It is too frightening. I was drowning back then, Zachary. Living with Jesse, living under that shadow of violence and fear, I was dying by inches. If you had not offered me a way out, I do not know what would have become of me. You would have found a way, Zachary said with certainty. You are the strongest person I know, Evelyn. You would have survived somehow. Maybe, Evelyn said, but I would not have thrived. I would not have bloomed. You gave me the space and the safety to become who I was meant to be. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. They stood by the stream as darkness fell, holding hands, listening to the water and the evening birds and Katie's piano music drifting from the house. Evelyn thought about the journey she had taken, from the frightened girl standing in the snowflake street to the woman she had become. She thought about Jesse, long dead now, and said a quiet prayer for his troubled soul. She thought about all the choices she had made, the courage it had taken to step out of the shadow, the risk of trusting Zachary when trusting anyone had seemed impossible. And she thought about love, real love, the kind that did not demand or take but gave and supported and lifted up. The kind of love Zachary had shown her from the very beginning, patient and steady and true. The kind of love she had learned to give back, no longer afraid of being hurt or abandoned or betrayed. I love you, she said, not for the first time, not for the thousandth time, but with all the depth and feeling she had learned over 3 decades of marriage. "Thank you for giving me this life. Thank you for sharing it with me," Zachary replied, pulling her close. "Every day with you has been a gift." They stood there in the gathering darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful and lasting, who had proven that love could be simple and profound at the same time. The shadow that had once darkened Evelyn's life was gone, replaced by the light of a life well lived, a love fully realized, a future filled with hope. The stream burbled on, eternal and peaceful, and overhead the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. In the distance, Katie's piano music reached a crescendo and then resolved into a gentle, satisfied conclusion. Everything was as it should be. Everything was exactly right. Zachary and Evelyn eventually made their way back to the house hand in hand, and as they climbed the porch steps, Evelyn paused to look back at the land they had built together. The barn stood solid against the twilight, the corrals held horses that nickered softly in greeting, and the garden she had nurtured for 3 decades stretched out in neat rows. This was home. This was hers. This was the life she had chosen, and it was more than she had ever dared to dream when she stood in Snowflake all those years ago, watching her brother's violence and feeling hopeless. Inside, Katie finished her practice and came to hug them both good night before heading to bed. At 18, she was preparing to leave for a music conservatory back east in the fall, another child launching into the world with confidence and capability. Evelyn and Zachary sat together in the front room, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, and talked quietly about their day, their children, their plans for tomorrow. The conversation was unremarkable, the kind of gentle sharing that happened between two people who knew each other completely. But it was also everything. It was the foundation of their life together, this easy communion, this comfort in each other's presence, this certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. Eventually, they went to bed in the room they had shared for 30 years, and Evelyn lay in the darkness listening to Zachary's breathing slow and deepen into sleep. She thought about the scared woman she had been, about the quiet cowboy who had offered her coffee and kindness, about the leap of faith it had taken to trust him. And she thought about everything that had come after, the hard work and the triumphs, the children and grandchildren, the love that had deepened and matured like good wine. She had lived under a gunslinger's shadow for too long, trapped and afraid and slowly dying inside. And then Zachary had showed her a simpler life, a better life, a life built on partnership and mutual respect and genuine love. He had not rescued her like some fairy tale prince. He had offered her tools and then worked beside her as she built her own freedom. He had been her partner in every sense of the word, and that partnership had created something beautiful and enduring. Evelyn reached out in the darkness and found Zachary's hand, lacing her fingers through his even as he slept. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more of the endless tasks that came with running a ranch and raising a family. But it would also bring more laughter, more small joys, more moments of connection with this man who had changed everything. She closed her eyes, secure in the life she had built, confident in the love she had found, and drifted into peaceful sleep. The shadow was gone. The sun had risen, and the life she lived in that light was everything she had ever needed it to be. The years continued their steady march, bringing changes both great and small to the Morrison ranch and the family who called it home. Katie left for her music conservatory in 1916, and though Evelyn missed her terribly, she took pride in seeing another of her children pursue their dreams with confidence. The house felt quieter with just Zachary and Evelyn rattling around in it, but they adapted, rediscovering each other in ways that had been difficult when the children were underfoot. They took long rides together through their property and into the surrounding hills, something they had not done in years. They read aloud to each other in the evenings, finished dinner at a leisurely pace without having to referee children's arguments, and made love with the unhurried passion of people who knew each other's bodies and hearts completely. Evelyn discovered that this stage of life, with its slower pace and deeper intimacy, had its own particular sweetness. Sam and his wife had their fourth child in 1917, a daughter they named Evelyn in honor of her grandmother. Evelyn Morrison held her tiny namesake and felt the circle of life completing itself in the most beautiful way. She was 56 now, her hair more silver than brown, her hands weathered from decades of work, but she felt more vibrant and alive than she had in her youth. The war in Europe finally touched their lives when America entered the conflict in 1917. Isaac, working for the railroad, was deemed essential and exempt from service, but Daniel Bradford, Jessica's son who had become so dear to them, enlisted and shipped out to France in early 1918. Evelyn prayed every night for his safety, this unexpected nephew who had brought a piece of her brother back into her life in a way that was healing rather than harmful. Daniel came home in 1919, thinner and quieter but fundamentally unchanged, and settled back into his carpentry work in Flagstaff. He married the following year and specifically asked Evelyn to attend the wedding, wanting her blessing. She went with tears in her eyes, grateful that this young man had chosen to be part of their family, that something good had come from Jessica's troubled legacy. The 1920s brought prosperity to the Morrison Ranch as demand for quality horses surged. Maggie and Henry, now fully running the day-to-day operations, expanded the breeding program and started training horses specifically for rodeo work. Their children, ranging from 15 to 7, were all competent riders and workers, and the ranch had become a true family operation spanning generations. Zachary, now in his 60s, had slowed down but remained active, particularly enjoying teaching his grandchildren the skills he had spent a lifetime perfecting. Evelyn watched him with one of the youngest grandchildren on a gentle mare, his patience infinite as he explained how to hold the reins properly, and fell in love with him all over again. He had always been a good man, but seeing him as a grandfather, generous with his time and wisdom, made her heart overflow. Katie graduated from the conservatory in 1920 and briefly pursued a career performing in concert halls back east before deciding that life was not for her. She returned to Arizona in 1922, took a position teaching music in Flagstaff, and reconnected with an old friend of Sam's, a banker named Robert Foster. They married in 1923, and Katie settled into married life with the same joy and passion she brought to everything. In 1925, Evelyn and Zachary celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. The ranch threw a massive celebration, with people coming from across the territory to honor the couple who had built such an impressive legacy. There were speeches and toasts, music and dancing, and more food than even the crowd could consume. Evelyn wore a new dress in a deep blue color that Zachary said matched her eyes when she was young, and he wore his best suit, looking distinguished with his silver hair and weathered face. 40 years, Evelyn said as they danced to a song Katie played on the piano. How did we get so lucky? It was not luck, Zachary replied. It was choice. We chose each other and we kept choosing each other every day for 40 years. That is what made this work. Best choice I ever made, Evelyn said. Second best for me, Zachary teased. The best was working up the courage to talk to you in the first place. They laughed together, moving slowly across the floor, surrounded by their children and grandchildren and friends, living proof that love built on respect and partnership could last a lifetime. The years continued to accumulate. Sam's veterinary practice had grown to include 2 junior partners. Maggie and Henry's eldest daughter showed promise as a horse trainer that exceeded even her mother's considerable talent. Isaac had risen to a management position with the railroad. Elijah was superintendent of schools for the county. Katie was raising 3 children while teaching music and occasionally performing at local events. Daniel had become a successful contractor, building homes across Flagstaff and the surrounding area. The Morrison Ranch itself had become something of an institution, known across Arizona and into New Mexico and Utah for the quality of its horses and the integrity of its owners. Young people sought out positions working there, knowing they would learn from the best and be treated fairly. The stone house had been expanded and modernized over the years, now with electricity and indoor plumbing, but it retained its essential character, still solid and welcoming. In 1930, Evelyn turned 69 and Zachary turned 72. They were slower now, aches and pains more frequent, but they remained active and engaged with life. Evelyn still tended her garden, though she had help now from one of the grandchildren who showed an interest. Zachary still worked with the horses, though he left the most difficult training to Maggie and the hands. They still took rides together, though they stayed closer to home and went at a gentler pace. One evening in the fall of 1930, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. They had been married for 45 years, known each other for 46, and built a life that had exceeded anything either of them had imagined when they first met. "I have been thinking about the past," Evelyn said, "about how far we have come, about everything we survived and built and created." "Dangerous thing thinking about the past," Zachary said with a smile. "You start getting nostalgic." "Maybe I am feeling nostalgic," Evelyn admitted. "But also grateful. Profoundly, deeply grateful for every moment of this life. For you, for our children, for this place, for the chance to build something good after I thought everything good was lost." Zachary took her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "You built something good," he said. "I just gave you a safe place to do it." "You gave me everything," Evelyn corrected. "You gave me love and respect and partnership. You showed me what my life could be when I lived in the light instead of the shadow. You made me believe in possibilities again." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars emerged. From inside the house, they could hear the sounds of family, as several of their children and grandchildren had gathered for Sunday dinner and were still visiting. Laughter floated through the open windows, along with the clatter of dishes being washed and the murmur of multiple conversations. "We did good," Zachary said eventually. "Look at them all, happy and healthy and making their own ways in the world. That is our legacy, Evelyn. Not the ranch or the money or any of that, them. We raised good people who are raising good people. That is what matters." "That is what matters," Evelyn agreed. They continued to sit as full darkness fell and the temperature dropped, bringing the crisp coolness that marked autumn in the high desert. Eventually, Maggie came to find them, concerned they were getting too cold. "We are fine," Evelyn assured her daughter. "Just enjoying the evening." "You have been enjoying it for 2 hours," Maggie said with fond exasperation. "Come inside before you catch your death." They went inside to the warmth and light and family, and the evening ended as so many had before, with everyone gathered around the big table, talking and laughing and being together. Evelyn looked around at the faces of her children and grandchildren, at Zachary presiding over it all with quiet satisfaction, and felt complete. The seasons turned, and winter came to northern Arizona with snow in the mountains and frost in the valleys. Evelyn and Zachary spent more time indoors, reading and talking and planning for spring. They were in the comfortable territory of a long marriage where words were often unnecessary, where they could sit together in companionable silence and feel perfectly content. Spring arrived in 1931 with the usual fanfare of wildflowers and new calves and baby birds. Evelyn was planting her garden on a warm April morning, kneeling in the dirt and setting seedlings with practiced efficiency, when Zachary came to find her. "I think you need to come inside and rest," he said. "You have been out here for 3 hours." "I am almost done," Evelyn protested, but when she tried to stand, her knees protested and she nearly fell. Zachary caught her, steadying her, and she was suddenly aware of how frail they had both become. When had that happened? When had they crossed the line from capable to fragile? "Let me finish this," Zachary said. "You go inside and put your feet up." Evelyn did not argue, which told her more clearly than anything how tired she actually was. She went inside, made tea, and sat in her favorite chair by the window where she could watch Zachary finish planting the garden. He worked slowly but methodically, and she felt a rush of love so intense it brought tears to her eyes. This man, this good and gentle man, had been her partner for almost half a century. How blessed she had been to find him, to choose him, to build this life with him. The summer of 1931 was hot and dry, testing even the reliable spring that fed their property. The garden struggled despite Evelyn's best efforts, and several of the older cattle had to be sold off because the grazing could not support the full herd. It was a hard season, but they had weathered worse, and with Maggie and Henry managing most of the work, Zachary and Evelyn could focus on simply being together. They celebrated their 46th wedding anniversary in November with a quiet dinner, just family, at the ranch. No grand party this time, just the people they loved most gathered around the table they had built together. It was simple and perfect, exactly the kind of celebration that suited them now. That night, lying in bed with Zachary's arms around her, Evelyn said, "I want you to know that if I had it to do all over again, I would not change a single thing. Not one moment, not one choice. This life, this love has been everything." "Why does that sound like goodbye?" Zachary asked, pulling her closer. "It is not," Evelyn assured him. "It is hello. It is I am here and you are here and we are together, and that is all that matters." "Always," Zachary said, "always together." They drifted into sleep, secure in each other and in the life they had built, and the night passed peacefully around them. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, the mountains stood eternal, and the stream burbled its endless song. The Morrison ranch slept, wrapped in the quiet peace that came from being exactly what and where it was meant to be. The years continued, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Grandchildren graduated from school, got married, had children of their own. Evelyn and Zachary became great-grandparents, a designation that delighted them even as it made them feel impossibly old. The ranch adapted to changing times, incorporating new techniques while maintaining its commitment to quality and integrity. Zachary's health began to decline in 1933. Nothing dramatic, just a gradual slowing, a growing need for rest, occasional confusion that worried everyone. The doctor in Snowflake said it was simply age, the body wearing out after 7.5 decades of hard use. There was nothing to be done except make him comfortable and let nature take its course. Evelyn refused to accept it at first, tried to insist there must be some treatment, something they could do. But Zachary himself was philosophical about it. "I have had a good run," he told her one afternoon as they sat together on the porch, a blanket over his legs despite the warm spring weather. A longer run than I had any right to expect, and a better one than I ever dreamed. I am ready, Evelyn. When the time comes, I am ready. Well, I am not ready, Evelyn said fiercely. I am not ready to lose you. I will never be ready for that. You will not lose me, Zachary said gently. I will always be with you, in the ranch we built, in the children we raised, in every memory we made together. That does not disappear just because my body wears out. Evelyn could not speak past the lump in her throat, so she just held his hand and let the tears fall. Zachary Morrison passed away peacefully in his sleep on a June night in 1933, with Evelyn lying beside him. She woke at dawn to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still clasped in hers. The grief that crashed over her was devastating, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe, but underneath it was gratitude. He had not suffered. He had simply slipped away after a life lived fully and well, surrounded by love until the very end. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the territory. People came from as far away as New Mexico and Utah to pay their respects to a man who had been known for his fairness, his kindness, and his skill with horses. Evelyn stood beside the grave, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and listened to person after person talk about how Zachary had helped them, taught them, treated them with respect and dignity. He was the best man I ever knew, she said, when it was her turn to speak. He showed me what love could be when it was built on respect and partnership. He gave me a life I had thought was impossible, and he loved me, steadfastly and faithfully, for 47 years. I miss him more than words can express, but I am so grateful I got to share his life. The days after the funeral were difficult. The house felt empty despite family constantly stopping by. Evelyn found herself turning to tell Zachary something, only to remember he was not there. She woke in the night reaching for him and finding only cold sheets. The grief was overwhelming, but she survived it because she had no choice, because their children and grandchildren needed her, because the ranch required attention. Maggie and Henry took over full operation of the ranch, which had been gradually happening anyway. Evelyn moved into the smaller house on the property that had been built years ago for the foreman, giving the main house to Maggie's growing family. She still gardened, still kept bees, still involved herself in ranch life, but at a slower pace that acknowledged her age and her grief. The years passed, each one taking her further from the life she had shared with Zachary, but also allowing the sharp edges of grief to soften into gentle memory. She took comfort in her family, in watching great-grandchildren grow, in sitting on the porch of her little house and looking out over the land they had built together. She rayed and gardened and occasionally went to town, always treated with respect as one of the founding members of the community. People often asked her about her life, about the early days of the ranch, about Zachary. She told the stories readily, wanting to keep his memory alive, wanting the younger generations to know what kind of man he had been. And sometimes, when she was alone, she would talk to him as though he were still there, telling him about the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, about the new foal or the bumper crop of tomatoes, about how much she missed him and how grateful she was for their time together. In 1940, on what would have been their 55th wedding anniversary, Evelyn was sitting on her porch when Sam came to visit. He was 64 now, graying and dignified, but he sat beside her with the same gentle presence he had always had. "I was thinking about Papa today," he said. "About how much he loved you, how devoted he was to you. That is rare, Mama. What you two had was rare." "I know," Evelyn said. "I knew it even then. That is why I was brave enough to take the chance, to trust him when trusting anyone seemed impossible. I knew that what he was offering was special." "You were brave to leave your brother," Sam said. "To step out on your own and build a new life. A lot of people would not have had that courage." "I had no choice," Evelyn said. "I was dying under Jesse's shadow. Your father showed me there was another way, but I still had to be brave enough to take it. We saved each other in a way. He gave me a path and I gave him purpose. Together we built something beautiful." She paused, looking out over the ranch, then added, "I would not trade a single moment of it. Not the hard times, not the struggles, not even the grief of losing him. All of it was worth it to have that life, that love." Sam hugged her, and they sat together watching the sun set over the mountains that had witnessed their family's story unfold. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and enduring, home to the fourth generation now. Children played in the yard of the main house. Horses grazed in the pastures. The garden Evelyn had started decades ago still produced abundantly under the care of one of her granddaughters who had inherited her green thumb. It was legacy. It was proof that stepping out of the shadow into the light had been worth every risk, every fear, every moment of uncertainty. Evelyn lived to see her 85th birthday in 1946, sharp-minded if physically frail. She was surrounded by family that spanned 5 generations now, from her oldest grandchild, who was nearly 50, to her youngest great-great-grandchild who was just weeks old. She held the baby and marveled at the journey that had brought her here, from frightened girl in Snowflake to matriarch of this thriving clan. "Tell us the story again, Grandma," one of the great-grandchildren asked. "About how you met great-grandpa Zachary." Evelyn settled back in her chair, the baby warm in her arms, and told the story she had told 100 times before. About the Gunslinger brother and the quiet cowboy who offered coffee and kindness. About choosing love over fear, possibility over resignation. About building a life together that had outlasted them both and would continue in these children and their children and their children's children. When she finished, there was silence as everyone absorbed the tale that was both family legend and personal history. Then someone started asking questions, wanting details, wanting to know more about Zachary and Jesse and the early days of the ranch. Evelyn answered patiently, keeping the memories alive, ensuring that the lessons of her life would be passed down. That night, alone in her small house, Evelyn looked at the photograph from their 40th anniversary, at Zachary's face so dear and familiar, and smiled. "We did it," she said softly. "We built something good, something lasting. I will see you soon, my love. Wait for me just a little while longer." She went to bed and slept peacefully, and when she did not wake the next morning, her passing was gentle and quiet, just as Zachary's had been. She was buried beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the wide Arizona sky they had both loved. At the funeral, held under brilliant sunshine with the entire family gathered, Maggie spoke about her parents' legacy. She talked about their love, their partnership, their determination to build something good and lasting. She talked about the values they had instilled in their children, and the example they had set of what marriage and family could be at their best. "My mother lived under a gunslinger's shadow until my father showed her a simpler life," Maggie said, "but it was more than that. He showed her what life could be when built on love and respect and partnership. And together, they created something that will last for generations. This ranch, this family, this legacy is their gift to all of us. And the best way we can honor them is to live by the values they taught us and pass those values on to our own children." As the family gathered after the service, sharing stories and memories and meals, it became clear that Evelyn and Zachary's influence would indeed extend far beyond their lifetimes. The ranch continued to operate under principles they had established. The family remained close, connected by bonds they had forged. The love they had shared set a standard that their descendants would strive to emulate. Years later, when the younger generations walked the property and asked about the history of the Morrison Ranch, they heard the story of Evelyn and Zachary. They heard about the woman who found the courage to step out of the shadow and the quiet cowboy who showed her a simpler, better life. They heard about love that lasted half a century and a partnership that built something enduring. And in the telling of that story, Evelyn and Zachary Morrison lived on, their legacy not just in the land and the buildings and the horses, but in the hearts and lives of everyone who came after them. Proof eternal that choosing love, choosing courage, choosing to step into the light was always, always worth it.